Hi, ladies. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mehar Nemani, and I'm a junior at Centennial High School, and with me is Aditi Mohan, a junior at Chattahoochee. So I'm part of the SLJC class of 22, and Aditi is part of the class of 21, but we are both part of the Secretary of State Ambassador team, also known as the Johns Creek Ambassadors this year. So with us today as our guest speaker is Judge Rachelle Carnesale. She is currently employed as a Superior Court judge in Fulton County. She graduated from Emory University of Law in 1992 and started out as a Chief Assistant District Attorney with the Blue Ridge Judicial Circuit. She has held many titles, including the Division Direct at the Georgia Department of Family and Child Services, the Deputy Director of the Georgia Office of the Child Advocate, the Director of the Georgia Child Death Investigation Program, the Assistant Attorney General at the Law Department at the state of Georgia, and many more. She also founded the Georgia Infant Safe Sleep Coalition and is a member of many groups such as the Georgia Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act panel, the Atlanta Bar Association, Lawyers Club of Atlanta, Georgia Association of Women Lawyers, etc. We welcome you here today and thank you for joining us. Let's get started.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
So from an assistant district attorney to a judge in Superior Court, your journey is quite expansive and commendable. Can you speak a little bit about your journey as a whole and what you learned along the way?
I think that my journey is a great reminder of people who hear my story that you don't always know where your path will lead. I have had very good fortune professionally in terms of jobs popping up for me that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. And so when I went to school to be a lawyer, I intended to be a child abuse prosecutor, period, hard stop. That was going to be my career forever. And along the way, I was a prosecutor, but I was also an assistant attorney general, and I worked in child welfare, and I started some programs, and I went back to being an assistant DA, and then ultimately decided that I'd like to be a judge. But my career really was an evolution, and I took something great away from every one of the jobs that I had, even the hardest ones, and even some of them that I didn't apply for. I got having been moved to the Division of Family and Children's Services, which, as you guys know, is a social work agency. When there was a change of administration in 2011, I was moved from the Office of the Child Advocate, which was a dog, over DFACS to actually run DFACS for a year. And that was an agency of 6,000 people. I had previously supervised about 20. And of course, I didn't have a social work degree. And I'd been watching DFACS for years and partnering with them, but I switched to running it. And it was the hardest job I've ever had, but it was also in many ways the most rewarding. So I think being really open-minded in your career can really lead to great opportunities. I didn't decide that I wanted to be a judge until about 4 years before I received the appointment. Just as I practiced in court, I began to notice more and more the tremendous impact judges could have, for better or for worse, on a case by overstepping their bounds, really. In a bad way, in a negative way. And the more I observed that, the more I thought, I might be able to do some good in that job too. And that's how I developed an interest in that. So I guess the message about my career is be open to new challenges. I kind of joke about being the Forrest Gump of the legal world because I've been all over. I've had a lot of different jobs, but in each of those, I found really rewarding experiences.
Thank you. A little bit related to what you're saying is the next question, and it's what, in your opinion, is the most important thing for anyone pursuing a career like yours during the 21st century?
What's a very important thing for anyone considering a career like mine?
Yes.
Okay. I think for students, it's important that you get as much experience in as many areas as you can to go into this being very well-rounded. So you go into a position, whether it's in law or business or any other area, teaching, any number of professions, even medicine, carrying with you different lenses that you pick up along the way. And that's how you view different things. The more diverse your experiences, the more subjects that you study and activities that you partake in, the broader your lenses will be. So my advice would be to try anything you're interested in, even if you think you might not have time. A great example would be that a few years ago, I've got a freshman, and when he was in 6th grade, we had never heard him sing, and he came home one day and said he was trying out for Shrek the next day. And his dad and I both were kind of thinking, maybe we shouldn't encourage that. He's doing sports and he's a really good student. it's led to really fun things for him and turned out to be a real passion of his, doing musical theater. So, that's something he'll carry with him no matter what he does, whether he does another play ever again. But your experiences shape how you're able to respond to people and how you view things. So I think it's important to try everything.
Absolutely. So being a woman in law enforcement, how have you encountered underrepresentation in the workplace, and what advice would you give to young women interested in pursuing the law field?
Okay. So I became an assistant attorney general in 1992. And at that time, and I guess really that sounds like so long ago to you guys, but it won't to the adults who are listening. But in 1992, I wasn't allowed to wear pants to work, and I wasn't allowed to really wear anything but dresses, so no pantsuits. When I would go to South Georgia for court, which I did pretty frequently, I was the only female in the courthouse. So times have really changed for women in the law. Now, at least half the students are female in law schools. Female attorneys are going into more and more areas of the law. Most district attorneys' offices are heavily populated with women. And there's different dynamics at play for that, but the field is wide open now for females. It's important to believe that every field is open to you as a young female. It's important to, again, try activities that will open doors for you. One of the things that I talked to you ladies about when we discussed my participating in this was developing relationships with people who are doing things that you're interested in. And so one of the things that's helped me tremendously in my life and in my career was finding particularly female mentors. So when I was growing up in Casper, Wyoming, I never imagined that I would be a Superior Court judge in the biggest county in Georgia. I never would have imagined I'd be living in Atlanta, or that I'd make my home here for the last 30 years. But I began to do things starting in high school that opened doors later in Georgia and in law school. So I began to try to intern with attorneys. I asked to start an internship program at my local hometown district attorney's office because they didn't really have interns. And again, developed in college and law school. In law school, same thing. I did internships, developed strong relationships with professionals. I interned with the Attorney General's office, which is how I ended up working there after I graduated. And as I told the ladies, my mentors there are still my mentors today. So my supervisor in the Attorney General's office is still the person all of these years later, almost 30 years later, who if I leave the bench and I'm not quite sure, that's who I call to say, I'm stuck, or I've done this, I can't find a case, can you help? They've also just been supportive in terms of knowing what my goals were and helping me achieve those goals. One thing I really like to do is mentor other people who are interested in careers, both males and females, but I encourage you to look for folks who can help you and pave your way, because getting into school, getting into programs, finding jobs, all of those things are doable if you don't have good connections, but good connections will always help that. And of course, it's always great to have advisors.
Thank you. I think that's really wonderful advice. So our next question is, before your time as a judge, you dealt a lot with child welfare and child safety, and you founded the Child Death Investigation Program and co-founded the Georgia Infant Slave Sleep Coalition. As a mother of two boys, how did this strengthen your passion in pursuing this field of law, and why?
That's also a great question, you guys. I have a really unusual specialty, and very often if you talk to people who have a very specific specialty, there's a great backstory behind it. There is not a great backstory behind why I decided to start prosecuting child abuse before I was a judge. I just was very interested in that. When I was in junior high, the Wayne Williams child murders were occurring in Georgia, and that's something we watched every night on the news. That piqued my interest. I followed that at a really young age, and I thought how interesting and rewarding to try to catch someone who's hurting kids, because nothing's worse than hurting kids. So throughout my career, I started to develop that as my specialty, and ultimately young child homicide became my specialty, which sounds like a crazy specialty, but I liked a couple things about it. There's science behind those cases and evidence and proof. And while my math skills weren't good enough to become a doctor, I was always interested in medicine. So I was comfortable going to autopsies, and I was very interested in going to crime scenes, and that just developed as a real passion for me. So the question was, how am I impacted by my children and my experiences in terms of child welfare and developing programs? I have two sons. One I've already mentioned, the musical theater baseball kid. And then my older son has autism. He goes to Johns Creek High School and is in the programs there. If you guys go to Johns Creek, if anyone here goes to Johns Creek, which I don't think we have Johns Creek kids today, but you may have gone to middle school with him. His name is Ryan. And so one lens for me is the lens of a special needs parent. Of course, having the specialty of fatal child abuse, one thing that I noticed right away is that in hearing the characteristics of young victims, toddlers who were being fatally injured by their parents, there was a common theme. A lot of them seemed like they probably hadn't been diagnosed yet, but were likely on the spectrum of autism. So that doesn't mean every child who was murdered was, but it brought something special for me into the practice. So that became something that turned into a prevention measure, even in my job with the with Georgia DFACS. So because of my background in child abuse prosecutions and child homicides and what I knew about my own son, one of the programs that I instituted when I was at DFACS was to do developmental evaluations on every kid, every toddler coming into DFACS custody, so that those kids could immediately start getting services and hopefully have better outcomes. They're just much, much higher risk for abuse. So I think it's important to know what your lenses are, and sometimes you should step out of your lens. Again, it would be a mistake, right, to assume every child who's injured is injured because they are, challenging because of a disability. That's not always the truth. So one thing I would encourage all of you to do is identify what your lenses are and apply them when appropriate. So the reason that I founded with a good friend from public health, the Georgia Infant Safe Sleep Coalition, was because, as I mentioned, I was going to autopsy after autopsy after autopsy, and the vast majority of babies who died because of unsafe sleep conditions. Now, Georgia is a state where when I had my children, sleeping, bed sharing, which back then was referred to as co-sleeping, was very popular. There was a big push for mothers to nurse their children. That's easier to do if that baby's in bed with you at night. But unfortunately, that leads to some unsafe sleep position. They can actually die from positional asphyxiation. Also, when I was a little kid, babies were always put on their stomachs because my mother and other mothers of that generation were terrified children would vomit and choke. What we know now is it's critically important to be on your back to sleep as an infant. So really, that was an effort to do something productive, not prosecuting anyone. It wasn't criminal for someone to accidentally smother their baby in bed. It was a horrible, horrible accident, but that was something where I was in a position with friends from other agencies to start a program to hopefully make a difference for some families. So we offered resources, we had materials, delivered training, but mostly it was encouraging practitioners in the medical field and other fields to talk to families before sending babies home with them about safe sleep conditions. So that was neat. Usually lawyers in prosecution don't get to take prevention measures. So that was something really special to me. I'm glad it still exists today. And, of course, we can't quantify whether it saved anybody or not, but we tried.
Thank you for that. So next question, well, you have this video of you reading this book called Elizabeth Started All the Trouble, which is about how hard women fought to get the 19th Amendment passed during the suffrage movement. And you mentioned that we're still fighting today for equality. So, where in your opinion are we in the equality spectrum, not only in our community, but our world as a whole?
Well, that's another really good question. So the Georgia Administrative Office of the Courts did a really neat project this year because it was the 100th anniversary of the suffrage movement to get women the vote of the 19th Amendment. And so they asked a number of female judges to read books, children's books about the suffrage movement online. And so if you look up Georgia Administrative Office of the Courts, either on Twitter or on YouTube, you'll find a whole bunch of judges reading children's books. That was a really fun experience for me. And I really enjoyed the book that I got to pick. I got to pick which book I was reading from a list, and I just really liked that title. The title of the book is Elizabeth Caused All the Trouble. But it was a very good book, and it was especially important to me to participate in that because I grew up, really, I was little in the 70s during the movement to have the Equal Rights Amendment, which has never passed. And so I grew up with a period in which feminism was on the rise. There was a lot of conversation about whether women should have equal rights. Gender roles were changing in marriages. And I observed all that from being a young person. And that shapes, again, it's a lens, right? So you guys aren't going to know, but a singer this year died, Helen Reddy, and she sang a song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. And that was kind of the anthem for the 70s. And that stayed with me all of these years. So in terms of where we are now, we're making tremendous progress. Our bench is, in terms of diversity, our bench isn't just half female. Actually, we're 11 to 9 female on our bench. But in terms of race, we're also a very diverse racial bench. Of course, you all know what I mean when I say something like representation matters, right? I can't see you guys because you don't have your cameras on, but I will guess that there are some people on this call who, when they watched President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris give their speech over the weekend, some of the moms got a little emotional. Now, for different reasons, right? Some got emotional because they didn't want that side to win, but others got emotional because they've waited a really long time to see a female in any role in the White House. So it's been a long time coming. It's been very difficult for women to achieve the highest offices, but we're in a lot of high offices. So one thing I think is it's just a great idea to look into where you're thinking of working. My previous job before my appointment to the Superior Court bench was working as the Chief Assistant DA in Cherokee County. I worked in that jurisdiction twice over a 20-year period. And in that office, the DA and the next top 2 people were women. And routinely, we would have applicants from law schools who said they saw the website. They were very excited about the idea of having female bosses and elected female DA. And the DA there was elected when she was only 35 years old. So, I was kind of like the grandma of the office there. It was a really young, hip office, largely led by females. So if that's something that you find exciting, do some research into places you're thinking about working. So that you can surround yourself again with great mentors. I've mentioned before my mentor at the Attorney General's office in the division that I worked in, the criminal division, when I worked there in 1992, it was entirely run by females. It was almost an all female section. And 2 of the 3 women, as I said, that I work for are still people that I contact today for help. So yeah, things are getting better. They'll continue to get better. I think we now see that we are getting very close to the highest jobs in the land. But again, we've got a lot of the high jobs. So think about who you've had here speaking today. There's some real heavy hitters on this agenda that are my co-presenters today. And they've all really achieved great things by really at very youthful ages. So it's only going to get better.
Thank you so much. You mentioned that you're a member of the Georgia Association of Women's Lawyers. And why do you think it's important to be part of these empowering organizations and to establish strong relationships in the community?
Sure. I'm sorry, my dog's barking in the next room. I hope it means Amazon's going to deliver something fantastic to my house right now. Now you know my guilty pleasure. Okay, so I am a member of the Georgia Association of Women Lawyers, and I'm a member of a lot of different associations of lawyers, but that's a particularly good one because there's a lot of programming that helps women. So I'm a member also of the Atlanta Lawyers Club and a lot of things that are co-ed, and I really enjoy that and have a lot of male friends who are lawyers. I don't want to give the wrong impression. But when you join a group that is female in organization, there's going to be more programs about how women can get ahead. And I've observed panels through GAL, that program, and I've also participated in panels for them that are meant to help people achieve their goals with either advice or mentoring. So much of the process of becoming a judge is a learning experience. So I'll just tell you about my experience to give you an example. When you want to be a judge, there's two paths to become a judge. You could seek an appointment for an open seat. So if there's a judge who retires before completing their term, it's left to the governor to appoint a new judge to fill that seat until the next election. That's one way. The other way is to wait till someone completes their term and just leaves an open seat, and then you can run. Both of those scenarios just happened in Fulton County. So I was appointed in June of 2019 to replace Judge Gail Tucson by Governor Kemp. And the process that I went through was first being screened by a committee that is also appointed by the sitting governor. Once you make it through that committee, you've really achieved something, because typically they receive hundreds of applications. They narrow that down to maybe 20 people to interview, and they select 3 to send to the governor, and then the governor selects the person that he's going to appoint, or she's going to appoint if we ever have a female governor. So that is how you come into the position, and that's how I got my position. That said, I then had to turn around and run for office just a few months later. So really, I took my seat at the very end of June, so July 2019, and in May 2019, I had to win an election to keep my seat, and I did have opposition. So only after about 4 months on the bench, I found out that I had opposition and had to begin fundraising and campaigning for my election. That is a bummer, but thank heavens, thank heavens I won and I got to keep my seat. This was a crazy year for elections, and one of my colleagues lost her election, and a lot of judges were ousted. So an important thing to know about judges is we're nonpartisan. So we don't run as Democrats or Republicans. There's no party politics in our jobs. So that makes it a little bit harder, because people at this point in time are kind of trying to pick one side or the other and vote that way. And they make sometimes assumptions about people on the ballot who they don't know their party affiliation. And it can mean that people lose their jobs who are doing a really good job. So that's how you get there. But it's important to understand the process of going through the Judicial Nominating Commission. So here's a great example. One thing that I didn't know is that group of 20 people likes it if you call them before you interview. Who would ever guess that? Who would ever guess that before you sit down for an interview, you're supposed to call and try to butter up the people who are going to interview you? I would never have guessed that. So I only learned that because I had had friends go through the process, and that I had been a member of different organizations that talked about things like that. So when I sat down with Gall for a meeting several months ago, the whole topic was about, hey, how do you get through the Judicial Nominating Committee? What can you do to get yourself on that list of 3? This is super helpful information. And if you're just a free agent roaming around hoping for the best, it's hard to get inside information, which really helps. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. So our next question is one of the quotes that you said before. You said that cases are not just numbers and people should not be shuttled through the system. It is important to me to follow the law and apply it equally. As the only woman in Superior Court from Fulton County, how do you work to implement this? Sorry, from Johns Creek, excuse me. How do you work to implement this into your work every day?
Well, so I grew up in a small, not small town, but a town of, well, I guess compared to where we live, it is a small town. So I grew up in a town of 60,000 people, and everybody knew everybody. I have worked in different jurisdictions. DeKalb is smaller than Atlanta, obviously. Decatur is. And Cherokee County is obviously a lot smaller. So I grew up in jurisdictions where things were a little bit more informal, and the courtroom employees kind of saw the same customers, and I'm putting quotes in customers, over and over. So different members of the same family over and over and over as victims or defendants. And so they just become known to the system. And I brought some of that with me to Fulton County, where, each judge has 300 criminal cases at least. Each judge has 300 civil cases at least. There are thousands of cases a year that come through, and you have to keep those cases moving. But for me, my style is to take my time with the defendant. That sometimes judges won't directly speak with the defendant. They'll just let the prosecutor ask the questions, and then they'll pass sentence. But I find that I feel more like I'm doing justice if I get to know the person a little. And it does matter to me why they're in the position that they're in, especially if they're young. And we've got a real crisis in Fulton County with the number of kids we have charged as adults. It's not crazy that they're charged as adults. A lot of them are charged with armed robbery, murder, aggravated assault, very serious charges. But it's important to me how they got where they are. And I think it's critical to recognize and understand that the families of defendants are also victims in a case sometimes. So besides the actual victims, there's other people who are impacted. If you hope for someone to actually do better in their lives, unless you're going to remove people permanently, which really only happens in the most severe of situations where someone will get a life sentence with no parole from prison. The reality is that most people are getting out of jail. And so if you are a rational person, you want those people to be better, right, when they get out. So it's impossible to tailor sentences. It's impossible to encourage people if you don't take time to get to know them a little bit. And I just think it's very unjust to treat people as if it's just a mill and move cases through. I have witnessed, as a lawyer, judges not in Fulton County and other jurisdictions doing mass pleas, which isn't legal anymore, but having everyone stand in the courtroom, everyone on their case announce that they're guilty, and everyone receiving a sentence when there's dozens and dozens of people there. That's not doing justice to me. I think it's important to look at people as individuals, see where they're coming from and what you can do, hopefully, to improve things. We have some good programs in Fulton County. One that I'll mention is called My Journey Matters. It's not my program. It's my good friend Judge LaGrua's program. But it's an opportunity for very young people who are charged with the most serious cases to pick an alternative, and that is to go to school and go through the program instead of going to, 20, 30 years in prison. It's not an opportunity that's granted frequently, but it's a very good program, and about 1,000 young people have successfully gone through that program. So I have sent people to that program, but it's only because I listened to them, listened to their families, and went, okay, I think that's one that LaGrua would take and handle for me and give them a second chance. Because the sad reality is, once you've been to prison and once you have a felony on your record, especially for men, to be honest, and especially for Black men more than anyone, their lives are ruined. It's going to be very difficult to find employment. It's going to be very difficult to succeed. And if you're interested in doing justice and being fair, it's important to see what you're really looking at.
Absolutely. I think judges impact so many lives. Every decision impacts so many people. So we're so lucky to have people like you on our Superior Court.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have one last question from us. You've been continuously involved in the Student Leadership Johns Creek program. So why is this program of interest to you, and why do you think it's important?
Well, first of all, you can tell from my background, right, that I like kids. And it makes me very sad to see young people come before me who I have to send to prison. And there's some circumstances where there's no choice about that. I think you heard from our new district attorney today. Did you hear from our new district attorney, Ms. Willis? I think so. Or maybe you're going to hear from her still. Depending on what the charges are, judges have limited options of dealing with folks. So if they're facing certain charges, there's one sentence and one sentence only that can be given in certain sentences. That's very sad to see. An example that's made me very sad as a judge was a young man I had to sentence to prison in a situation where a group of young men were playing with guns and one got killed. And so that didn't start off to be one friend wanting to murder his other friend, but because they were so reckless, that's what happened. And it's just very depressing to see kids go away to prison. I love seeing you guys and hearing your interesting questions and seeing how successful you're going to be and helping you and mentoring you. One thing that's happened because of my involvement in Student Leadership Johns Creek is I've decided to start a teen court. So last year, members of student leadership interned in my courtroom, came for field trips in my courtroom, and we've decided to expand that to City of South Fulton and the Atlanta Public School System and other schools in Fulton County. And it will be comprised of different kind of phases, but it'll give kids an opportunity to come, now not come because of COVID, but observe court on Zoom, ask me questions about what's happening, give me feedback about what they're seeing, which I find really helpful. Last year, the kids who came to sit in my courtroom got to sit up by the bench and they could pass me notes during court to say, oh, that's so sad, and what really happened, and why did you do that, and here's what I think about it. And so we'll have that will be one aspect of it. We're hoping to give an experience for kids who can participate more that gives kids an opportunity to see what it's like to be involved in a traffic stop or a situation with guns, both as law enforcement and the person facing law enforcement. So I think that will be a really neat opportunity. That's something we're working on as well. And then finally, I expect there'll be some kind of mock trial experience. So my courtroom's always going to be open to you guys. kids can participate in the program of teen court if they want to. If they just want to observe court, that's fine too. So if you are interested either in teen court or observing my courtroom or anything else, Ms. Sanders can give you the best way to get in touch with me, as can these two ladies. Both Mehar and Aditi can tell you how they got in touch with me. But I would love to see any of you in virtual court and answer any questions that you guys have anytime.
That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. We have one question in the chat from Anastasia. She said, was it easy for you to find good mentors in your different positions? If you have struggled with finding mentors, how did you go about overcoming that struggle and building strong connections?
So in some jobs it was easy, and in some jobs it was hard. In my first job, as I said, I had 3 bosses that were female, and I just really hit it off with 2 of them. I'm not saying I didn't like the third. I just didn't have as much contact with her. We didn't click as much. And so they remained, besides being my bosses, they were people that, I was a young woman learning how to be a grown-up. So they were people that I sought all kinds of advice from, including like, should I marry this guy before I got engaged? And it's important to have those relationships that aren't your parents in your life, I think. And you find you'll develop, when you're out in the world, you develop a work family. So you want to be in a place where you're comfortable with that. During my the first time I worked in Cherokee County was right after I left the AG's office, and there were only 12 of us in the office. And so I was really gung-ho to do child murders, and there was no one there to mentor me. So I reached out to someone in a different DA's office who I had heard speak at a conference, and it wasn't a woman, it was a man, but we're great friends to this day. And so my mentor was in a different office, and that's who I went to for advice about how to handle those trials when they came up. So you just have to be persistent.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? The floor is open to anyone here today. You can put it in the chat or just turn on your video or unmute your mic and speak out right now.
By the way, in follow-up to that, Aditi is interested in public health. So even though I'm not the perfect mentor for her, I have friends who would be. So one part of that is talking to adults, asking if they know someone who would be a good mentor. So I'm putting her in touch with somebody that's more aligned with her career interests. And so don't be shy about, you overcome that by searching yourself, but also ask for help. I don't expect you just to start calling everybody, every grown-up out there asking if they'll mentor you, but ask other people who may have good connections.
Absolutely. Connection is a huge part of our life nowadays, and you said it's very important in almost any field to build important, strong connections. Do we have any other questions from anyone in student leadership?
Hi, my name's Harrison. I have a question. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the immigration court is working in Georgia, because I know there's a lot of detention facilities in Georgia and that's handled a lot in Georgia. So I was wondering what you think of the system in place now, and if you think it's fair, how it can be improved.
Okay, so I have 0 experience with the immigration court, but what I can tell you is that I had a good friend who went to work with the Department of Justice doing that work, and he left after a period of months. He found it really challenging and he was not happy with it, so he actually switched sides. But I don't have any personal experience with it at all. So I know about it what you know about it from watching TV. I would anticipate that over the next months, the way it's being run now may change, given the change in leadership. But the only thing I know about it personally is just what my friend experienced, and he wasn't happy with his experience, so he moved on pretty quickly. And I think that's a good lesson too. As you start your careers, it's very important to be able to give yourself an oopsie. You need to stick with something long enough to see if it's going to be for you and if there's something there that you can learn and do. But if you just get into the wrong thing, get back out. Don't waste years and years doing something that you're not passionate about.
Absolutely. So we're kind of on the end of our session here. Are there any other key takeaways that you would like to mention for our students watching here today?
Okay, well, Mehar, you're a great takeaway. We had a great conversation the other day. The 3 of us had a fantastic conversation, and because you were brave enough to say, hey, I'm interested in that, can you turn me the right way? Now, Mehar is helping set up this teen court for me. So you have to be bold. Besides, in answer again to Anastasia, besides looking for mentors and besides asking for help, you have to be comfortable saying, I am really into this. Is there some way that I could help? And that's going to be a huge help to me. I really needed a student to be involved in that. But if she'd been too shy to say, what? That's so cool. I would love to help with that. That opportunity would pass by. So volunteer for things that you can volunteer for. The people who are doing these interviews today are a great example of folks who took the challenge to deal with an adult, which is not everybody's favorite thing to do, and get to know them and ask them questions. So both these ladies are great examples of being bold, which is really important for you guys, especially now that you can't physically go to places. Now that everything is virtual, you really have to be assertive, and you have to be bold.
Thank you so much. Before we end, can I just take a quick picture real quick?
Sure, I'd love to too. Do I get to post one of all of us too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Sorry, it's really bright outside.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, I got one too.
So thank you so much for joining us here today. You gave some excellent insight about your career and about the judicial program as a whole here in Georgia. We loved hearing from you and hope some of us are going to join your program for sure. It sounds amazing, and that we will be in contact with you soon.
Very good.
I had one more question. So who was responsible for your youngest son's name?
Not only was she responsible for my naming my youngest son, she has kept us on track living here in Johns Creek. She tells us where we were supposed to go and what's going on and what the opportunities are. She's helped us navigate the school system. So Ms. Sanders will never steer you wrong. And she did name my youngest child.
And she's my daughter's other mother, or favorite mother.
Right, not because I'm married to her dad, but because everyone always thinks I'm her stepmom when we say that, just because we're very close.
Yes.
If I had a daughter, it would be her daughter.
It would be my daughter. So thank you so much. The kids learned so much from you. And we're gonna pass it over to Liz Hausman. And so Liz, if you would unmute your video. There's Liz.
Liz.
Hello, Judge. How are you?
Good, how are you?
So Aditi and Mehar, good job. And I'm going to leave this over with Akila. So I will be hiding my video. Bye, Rachelle. Thank you.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes. Can
Okay.
you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, good.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone.